Every morning we wake up and face a choice. It's not always a loud or dramatic choice. Often it whispers. It's there in the quiet pause between opening your eyes and reaching for your phone. It's in the tension between the comfort of your blankets and the challenge of your goals. And the choice is this: will today be intentional or automatic? See, we all want to be consistent. We want to show up every day, keep the promises we made to ourselves, and move closer to the future we imagine. But most people focus only on the what. They say, I'm going to work out every day, or I'll write 1,000 words before lunch, or I'll meditate for 10 minutes each morning. These are great intentions, but intentions without a foundation rarely last. Because the truth is, consistency doesn't begin with action, it begins with meaning. It begins with a reason. It begins with why. When people struggle to stay consistent with their daily goals, it's not usually because the goal is too big, or the schedule is too busy, or the motivation disappears. It's because the goal becomes disconnected from something deeper. The task becomes a chore instead of a commitment. And when we forget why we started, we also forget why it matters. Purpose is what transforms obligation into devotion. Think about someone training for a marathon. If all they focus on is the pain of the daily runs, the early mornings, the sore legs, they'll quit. Eventually, the discomfort will outweigh the discipline. But if they remember why they're doing it, maybe they're running to raise money for a cause they love, or to prove to themselves they can do hard things, or to reclaim their health after a tough year, then every mile becomes a reflection of their purpose. The run still hurts, but it's not meaningless. It's part of something bigger. The same principle applies to your daily goals. Whether you're building a business, improving your health, writing a book, learning a new skill, whatever your goal is, there was a moment when it mattered enough to commit. There was a spark, a conviction, a vision. The mistake most people make is thinking that moment was enough to carry them through the long haul. But purpose doesn't last unless it's revisited. Consistency, then, isn't just about doing the thing. It's about remembering why you do the thing. Every single day. So, here's the practice. Before you dive into your day, reconnect with your why. Don't just look at your to-do list. Sit with your intention. Ask yourself, why did I set this goal? What am I trying to create? Who am I trying to become? What impact am I hoping to have? Let that be the first thing you tap into before you check your messages, scroll social media, or start reacting to the noise of the world. If you can do that, even for 2 minutes, you start your day from a place of alignment, not anxiety. You anchor your actions to your values. You shift from working for something to working from something. There's a difference between discipline that's driven by fear, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough, and discipline that's driven by purpose. The former is exhausting, the latter is empowering. When you lead with why, your goals stop being external pressures and start becoming internal expressions. You're not just crossing off boxes, you're becoming more of who you're meant to be. And this is where consistency becomes sustainable. Because now it's not about whether you feel motivated today, it's about whether you're staying true to your mission. Motivation is fleeting, purpose is fuel. People often ask, how do I stay consistent when I don't feel like it? The answer is, stop chasing feelings, start chasing meaning. When the goal is tied to something that matters to you, the feelings catch up later. It's no longer about forcing yourself to do something. It's about refusing to abandon who you're becoming. Now, does this mean you'll never miss a day? No, of course not. Life is messy. There will be days when you fall short, when you get distracted, when you just can't do everything you set out to do. That's okay. Because when you're rooted in purpose, you don't let a bad day become a broken pattern. You return to your why and you begin again, not because you have to, but because it matters. Imagine someone working on a personal goal, let's say, building a daily journaling habit. If their only reason is because I heard it's good for mental health, that might carry them for a week or two. But if they go deeper, if they say, I want to journal because I've been so disconnected from my thoughts and I want to understand myself again, or because I want to be the kind of person who reflects before reacting, suddenly that goal becomes a mirror of their deeper values. And every time they open that journal, it's not just about writing, it's about becoming. That's the power of why. It transforms goals from obligations into reflections of your identity. So if you want to be consistent with your daily goals, don't just focus on the habit. Focus on the heart behind the habit. Ask yourself, what is the story I'm writing with my life? What do I want it to say about who I am? Because when you live with purpose, even the small actions matter. Even the quiet moments count. And consistency becomes less about discipline and more about devotion. That's how you build something that lasts. That's how you show up not just today, but every day. That's how you lead yourself with intention. Not from pressure, not from fear, but from purpose. Always from purpose. There's a quiet difference between those who go through the motions and those who move with meaning. On the surface, it can look the same commute, the same gym, the same calendar blocks, the same checklists. But beneath the surface lies something far more powerful. Intention. And that difference is what turns a routine into a ritual. People often talk about success in terms of habits and systems, and there's value in that. Discipline matters. Repetition matters. But what truly creates transformation over time isn't just doing the same thing every day. It's believing in what you're doing. Because when something becomes a ritual, it stops being a task on your list. It starts becoming a declaration of who you are. Routines are everywhere. They're practical, efficient, predictable. But they're also easy to abandon when things get hard. Why? Because routines serve productivity, rituals serve purpose. And purpose is much harder to walk away from. Consider the difference between brushing your teeth because it's part of the routine versus taking 2 minutes to care for your body because you believe in showing up with confidence. Or compare making coffee just to stay awake versus treating that moment as a pause, a quiet reset before the storm of the day begins. One is mechanical, the other is meaningful. It's not about how much time it takes, it's about what you pour into the time. When people struggle to stay consistent with daily goals, it's often because their habits are disconnected from a deeper identity. They say, I want to wake up at 6 a.m. every day, or I'm going to read 10 pages daily. But if those things are just boxes to check, they fade fast. But when you shift your mindset, when you take the same action and give it meaning, you create something you can stand on. Think of a writer who sits down every morning with a cup of tea, a candle lit, and a journal beside them. Not just typing words, they're entering a sacred space. That's not a routine, that's a ritual. And it's in that sacred space that creativity finds them day after day. You don't need incense or chants or special music to make something a ritual. All it takes is intention. Ask yourself, what does this action mean to me? What am I connecting to when I do this? Am I just doing it to get it done? Or am I doing it because it reflects something I care about? When we start creating rituals instead of routines, we stop chasing results and start honoring values. For example, instead of thinking, I need to work out because I want to lose weight, you can think, this is the hour where I remind myself that I'm strong. This is the time where I reconnect with my resilience. The workout becomes more than exercise. It becomes an expression of strength, of self-respect. That's when the habit sticks. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. Rituals also invite presence, and presence is a powerful ingredient for consistency. If you're present in the process, you're more likely to show up again. You're more likely to care, to notice progress, to adjust when needed. But when everything becomes automatic, you can go through an entire week doing the right things and still feel empty. It's not the doing that's missing, it's the meaning. And here's something interesting. Rituals don't have to be perfect. In fact, their power often comes from the imperfection, the decision to show up anyway. You might not always be in the mood, you might not always have ideal conditions, but when you've built a ritual, you still show up, because now it's not about checking a box. It's about staying true to a part of yourself. Let's take journaling as an example. It's one thing to say, I'll write in my journal every night, but what if you reframe it as every evening, I sit with myself and listen to my thoughts? That's a ritual. That's a relationship with yourself. You're not just writing, you're meeting yourself in the quiet. And when you skip it, it doesn't feel like missing a task. It feels like missing a conversation with someone who matters. That's the key to sustainable consistency. When your daily goals stop being external obligations and start becoming internal commitments, you're more likely to return to them. Not because you have to, because you want to, because they remind you of who you are and what you stand for. Creating rituals is not about adding complexity, it's about layering depth. It's about taking something ordinary and giving it weight, purpose, identity. You can still use planners, timers, trackers. Those are tools, but don't confuse tools with meaning. The tool isn't what makes you consistent. The reason you use the tool is. And this doesn't mean every moment needs to be profound. Not every habit needs to be life-changing. But when you create rituals, you allow even the small moments to carry significance. That 5-minute walk after lunch isn't just a stretch. It's a reminder to breathe. That glass of water first thing in the morning isn't just hydration. It's a signal that your body matters. That thank you at the end of each day isn't just words. It's a ritual of gratitude. We're not robots. We're not meant to operate on routines that don't mean anything. We crave connection. We crave alignment. When our actions reflect our values, we feel more alive. We feel in flow. And consistency becomes less about effort and more about identity. So if you're struggling to stay consistent with your goals, maybe the answer isn't more discipline. Maybe the answer is more meaning. Maybe you don't need another productivity hack. Maybe you need to create a ritual that reflects who you want to be. Because in the end, it's not what you do once in a while that shapes your life. It's what you do consistently. And what you do consistently will only last if it feels connected to something real. So ask yourself, what daily action in your life deserves to become a ritual? And how would your days feel different if you weren't just living through a routine, but stepping into a daily ritual that reminds you who you are and why you started? That's where consistency lives, not in the grind, in the meaning, not in the checklist, in the connection. That's how you create a rhythm you can sustain and a life that feels alive. There's something sacred about the beginning of a day, not because the sun rises or the alarm goes off, but because of what it represents: a fresh start, a reset, a new chance to become the kind of person you imagine when you're at your best. And yet most of us let that moment slip away. We open our eyes, and instead of stepping into purpose, we step into reaction. Emails, notifications, news, the world starts pulling at us before we've had the chance to set our own direction. We lose the morning, and with it, we often lose the day. There's a reason why the phrase, win the morning, win the day, resonates with so many people. It's not just about waking up early. It's about reclaiming the first few moments of the day and using them to build momentum, not for the sake of productivity, but for the sake of identity. Because the truth is, how you begin determines how you continue. The way you start your day sets the tone for everything that follows. It's easy to underestimate the power of a small win in the morning. It might be as simple as making your bed, going for a walk, journaling, praying, reading a page from a book, or sitting in silence with a cup of coffee. These aren't dramatic actions, but they're meaningful ones. And meaning is what makes them powerful. Because when you begin your day with an act of intention, something that reflects who you want to be, you begin with alignment. You tell your mind, this is who I am. This is what matters. Most people think consistency comes from motivation, but what if it comes from momentum instead? What if the first few actions of your day carry more weight than we realize? When you start the morning with a win, no matter how small, you give yourself evidence that you are capable, that you are committed, that you are already moving forward. And once you're in motion, it's easier to stay in motion. But here's the part most people miss. Winning the morning doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require doing everything right. It simply requires presence. It means showing up, even for 5 minutes, with intention. It means resisting the temptation to let the world shape your day before you've shaped it for yourself. Because if you don't define what winning looks like for you, someone else will define it for you, and chances are it'll be tied to urgency, to pressure, to someone else's agenda. There's a difference between waking up and being awake. One is biological, the other is personal. When you start your morning by asking yourself, what matters to me today, you become awake in the truest sense. You become conscious of your direction. You step into the driver's seat. And from that place, even the hardest days become easier to navigate. Because you started with clarity, not chaos. The most consistent people aren't always the most disciplined. They're the most grounded. They have anchors, rituals, reflections, habits. that remind them who they are, and most of those anchors are built into their mornings. Not because mornings are magical, but because they're untouched. They haven't been hijacked yet. They're still yours. And that space, before the meetings, the calls, the noise, is where identity is formed. It's not about checking off a box. It's about showing up for yourself. The morning is when you get to decide, will today be led by purpose, or will it be led by pressure? Will I choose direction or default to distraction? And here's the thing, if you lose the morning, it doesn't mean the day is ruined. But if you win the morning, you're already ahead. You've already made a choice to lead, not follow. You've already taken ownership of your time, your mindset, and your energy. Think of the people you admire, the ones who seem steady, present, intentional. It's not that their lives are easier, it's that they've built a rhythm. And more often than not, that rhythm starts early. Not because early is better, but because early is quieter. There's space in the morning, space to listen, to breathe, to think, to remember. And that's where real consistency lives, not in noise, but in clarity. Winning the morning doesn't mean doing more. It means doing what matters most first. For some people, that's movement and waking up and going for a run to remind themselves they are strong. For others, it's stillness, meditation, prayer, or quiet reflection. For some, it's writing, sketching, creating, touching their purpose before the world demands their attention. There's no perfect formula. The question isn't what you do. The question is why you do it. And if you skip a morning, or if life throws you off track, it's not failure, it's feedback. It's a reminder of how much better the day feels when you begin with intention. So you reset, you return, you begin again. Because consistency isn't about never slipping, it's about always returning to what matters, always coming back to who you're becoming. When you build a morning practice that reflects your values, something else happens. You stop fighting with yourself. You stop relying on willpower to do the right thing later in the day because you've already cast your vote for the person you want to be. The tone has been set, the decision has already been made. It becomes less about discipline and more about identity. And identity is what carries you when motivation runs dry. So if you're serious about staying consistent with your goals, don't start with your calendar, start with your mornings. Ask yourself, what is one small thing I can do each morning that reminds me of who I am and what I care about? Then do it, not out of obligation, but out of devotion. Not because someone told you to, but because it aligns with the kind of life you want to build. Because when you win the morning, you don't just get more done, you become more of who you're meant to be. And that's a win worth showing up for every single day. We live in a world that celebrates the finished product. We admire the bestseller, the six-pack, the million-dollar business, the perfect performance. And in that celebration, we've somehow forgotten to honor the process that got us there. The messy drafts, the missed workouts, the quiet days when no one was watching, but the effort still showed up. We've become so obsessed with perfection that we've overlooked what actually builds consistency, progress. Perfection is a moving target. It's always one step ahead, always slightly out of reach. And the danger of chasing it is that it becomes a filter through which we judge our efforts. If it's not perfect, we tell ourselves it doesn't count. If we missed one day, we think we've failed. If the result isn't flawless, we question whether we're good enough to keep going. And that mindset is the enemy of consistency. Consistency isn't about doing it right every single time. It's about doing it again and again and again. It's about showing up even when it's awkward, even when it's small, even when it feels like you're barely moving forward. Because forward is still forward. Progress, however small, is still progress. The most consistent people aren't the most perfect, they're the most persistent. They've learned to fall in love with the journey, not just the outcome. They don't just track how far they have to go, they acknowledge how far they've come. And that shift in focus is what keeps them moving when others burn out. Imagine a mountain climber who only looks at the peak. Every step will feel insufficient. Every moment will be a reminder of how far they still have to go. But if that climber stops now and then to look back at the path they've already climbed, something powerful happens. They gain perspective. They realize they're not the same person who started at the bottom. They're evolving with every step. And that realization creates fuel. When you focus on progress over perfection, you stop asking, did I do it flawlessly? And start asking, did I grow today? And the answer to that question almost always keeps you going. The problem with perfection is that it's binary. You either hit the mark or you don't. It's all or nothing. And the human experience isn't binary. It's layered, it's nuanced, it's filled with micro wins, course corrections, and learning curves. When we track only the final result, we miss the daily victories that build real momentum. We miss the chance to say, I didn't hit the goal, but I showed up. I improved. I learned something. Let's take the example of someone trying to write a book. If they judge themselves only by the number of perfect chapters completed, they'll feel like a failure for months. But if they track the number of words written each day, or the days they sat down to write even when they didn't feel like it, they begin to see progress. The word count grows, the ideas take shape, and the act of showing up becomes its own reward. That's the secret. Progress is motivating, perfection is paralyzing, and here's what's even more powerful. When you track progress, you begin to trust yourself. You build evidence that you are consistent, that you're reliable, that you are the kind of person who follows through. That self-trust is everything, because goals will shift, circumstances will change, but your belief in your ability to keep going, that's the foundation that lasts. So how do you build that kind of mindset? Start small. Set a simple, measurable target that you can track daily. Not to impress anyone, not to hit some arbitrary number, but to create a rhythm, a personal accountability. If your goal is fitness, track your movement, not just the gym sessions, but the walks, the stretches, the tiny choices that reflect health. If your goal is mindfulness, track your check-ins, not just the 30-minute meditations, but the moments you pause to breathe, to notice, to reset. The goal isn't to be perfect every day. The goal is to build a body of evidence that says, I show up for myself. And when you miss a day, don't spiral. Don't tell yourself the story of failure. Tell yourself the truth. One off day doesn't undo your progress. What matters is the return, the comeback, the decision to keep going. Progress doesn't require perfection. It requires repetition. We often forget that the people who achieve the most didn't get there because they never messed up. They got there because they didn't let the mess-ups define them. They tracked the climb, not the slips. They kept a scoreboard of effort, not just results. And that's where the power lies, in the decision to measure what matters. Perfection doesn't matter. Progress does. Think of an artist sketching every day. Not every drawing is a masterpiece. Most won't be. But every stroke teaches something. Every canvas builds skill. And one day the masterpiece happens. Not because they aimed for perfection every day, but because they honor the process every day. The same is true for anyone with a goal. If you want to build consistency, stop waiting for the perfect conditions, the perfect version of you, the perfect result. Start with today. Start with what you can track. Start with what you can celebrate. Because those small wins compound. They create momentum. They create belief. And belief is what carries you when the journey gets hard. So choose progress. Choose to see value in the small steps. Choose to believe that showing up, even imperfectly, is better than not showing up at all. Because it is, every time. You don't need to be perfect to be powerful. You just need to be present and persistent. In the end, consistency isn't about never falling. It's about getting up faster, learning faster, returning faster. And that rhythm, the rhythm of returning, is built through progress. It's built when you stop asking, was it perfect? And start asking, was it honest? And if it was honest, if it was real, then you are already winning. No one climbs a mountain alone. Even when the journey feels solitary, the truth is, behind every consistent person is a circle of influence. People who challenge them, believe in them, remind them who they are, and hold them to a higher standard. The myth of the lone wolf is seductive, especially in a world that glorifies independence. But if you want to stay consistent with your goals, not for a week or a month, but for a lifetime, you need more than willpower. You need people. Accountability isn't about pressure, it's about presence. It's the quiet knowing that someone sees you, someone is walking alongside you, even if they're not on the same path. They don't have to understand every detail of your goal. What matters is that they understand why it matters to you, and they won't let you forget it when life gets loud. Think about a time you made a commitment and kept it, not because it was easy, but because someone else was counting on you. Maybe it was showing up to a 6 a.m. run because your friend was waiting at the park. Maybe it was delivering that project on time because your team was relying on you. That's the power of accountability. It turns a personal intention into a shared responsibility. It reminds you that your word matters not just to you, but to others. But it goes deeper than deadlines or check-ins. True accountability isn't transactional, it's transformational. It doesn't come from people who just tell you what you want to hear. It comes from people who are brave enough to tell you the truth, people who see the best in you and won't let you settle for anything less. They don't just ask if you hit the target, they ask if you honored your values, if you lived up to your potential, if you led with integrity. And then, just as essential, because while accountability holds you steady, inspiration pulls you forward. It reminds you of what's possible. It expands your vision. It shows you through someone else's courage or creativity or grit that there's another level to reach and that you can get there. Inspiration doesn't have to come from celebrities or influencers. In fact, it's often the most powerful when it's close to home. The single parent who keeps showing up, the friend who starts over after failure, the colleague who brings joy to the hard days. These are the people who remind us, not with speeches, but with presence, that consistency isn't about being superhuman, it's about being deeply human. Resilient, curious, courageous, the combination of accountability and inspiration creates a powerful ecosystem. It's not about having a crowd, it's about having the right few, the ones who make you better, the ones who speak the truth in love, the ones who challenge your excuses and celebrate your effort. When you have those people, you're no longer relying on motivation alone. You're tapping into something deeper, connection, purpose, belonging. Because let's be honest, motivation fades. Life gets messy. Distractions are everywhere. But a conversation with someone who truly gets it, someone who says, I see you, keep going, you're not alone, can reset your mindset in an instant. It's like a compass in the fog. It reminds you of your true north. And here's what most people don't realize. You don't just find these people. You become one of them. Consistency grows when you are both accountable to others and inspiring for others. When you're not just chasing your own goals in isolation, but creating a space where others are chasing theirs too. When you show up not just for yourself, but to model what it looks like to stay the course. That's the kind of community that lasts. That's the kind of connection that fuels real sustainable growth. If you want to build consistency, ask yourself who you're sharing the journey with. Who have you invited into your world not just to witness your progress, but to challenge you when you're drifting? Who are you letting see the unpolished, in-progress version of you, not just the highlight reel? That's where real accountability lives, in honesty, not perfection. And then ask yourself who inspires you. Whose life reminds you that you're capable of more, whose words or actions spark something inside you, something hopeful, something fierce, something true. Stay close to those people, study them, celebrate them, and then let their example lift your standards, not with shame, but with belief. Because consistency doesn't grow in isolation, it grows in context, in relationship, in shared energy. When you're surrounded by people who are also striving, also stretching, also staying true to something bigger than comfort, your own excuses start to feel small. You start to remember who you are and who you want to become. There's a quote that says, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. It's repeated often and for good reason, not because it's scientific, but because it's intuitive. We become like the people around us. So if you want to stay consistent with your daily goals, surround yourself with people who live with intention, people who don't just talk about growth, but live it, people who keep promises to themselves, not perfectly, but persistently. And be that person for others. When someone else is drifting, be their anchor. When someone else is doubting, be their reminder. We rise by lifting others. And in that rising, we become stronger too. Because at the end of the day, the journey of consistency isn't just about discipline. It's about environment, it's about energy, it's about being seen and supported and stretched. And that's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's how humans were built, to grow in connection, not in isolation. So if your consistency has been slipping, don't just look inward, look outward, look around. Who are you walking with? Who's helping you stay honest, stay inspired, stay aligned? If the answer is no one, don't be discouraged. Start small, reach out, invite someone in, share your goal, ask for support, offer support, build the kind of relationships that help you remember who you are, especially on the days you forget. Because you're not meant to do this alone. And when you stop trying to, everything changes. The weight becomes lighter, the journey becomes clearer, and the path, however long, becomes one you actually want to stay on. That's how consistency is sustained, not just through strength, but through connection. Not just through willpower, but through people. People who bring out your best. People who believe in your process. People who walk with you toward a better version of yourself. That's the real secret. And it's not a hack, it's human.